I'm sorry, but it's a really small wedding. We're keeping it intimate, just close family and friends. You understand, right? With everything going on, we just think it's better to keep things simple and avoid any potential drama or awkwardness. I hope you're not offended. My sister Vanessa's voice was apologetic but firm on the phone, delivering what was clearly a rehearsed explanation for why I wasn't invited to her wedding. Small wedding. Intimate. Just close family. The words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable, to make it seem like this was about logistics rather than what it actually was, a deliberate exclusion of me from a major family event. I sat in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. My only sister, the person I'd grown up with, shared a room with for 15 years, defended against bullies, helped with homework, was getting married, and I wasn't invited. Not as a bridesmaid, not as a guest, not even as a distant observer in the back row. Simply not invited. How small is the wedding? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Oh, maybe 50 people. Just immediate family and our closest friends. Ryan's parents want to keep it traditional and small. I'm sure you understand, it's really more about the marriage than the party anyway. 50 people. Small. Intimate. Just close family. The words rattled around in my head as I tried to reconcile them with the fact that I, her sister, wasn't included in that number. I understand, I said finally, though I didn't. I hope you have a beautiful day. Thank you for being so understanding. I knew you'd get it. You've always been so mature about these things. We ended the call shortly after. I sat in silence for a long time, processing the conversation and what it meant about my relationship with my sister and my family. But here's what I didn't know during that phone call, what I wouldn't discover until I saw the Instagram posts and Facebook photos from wedding guests in real time. Vanessa's small, intimate wedding actually had 250 guests. 250 people crammed into an expensive venue with a live band, open bar, elaborate floral arrangements, and a multi-tier cake. It wasn't small. It wasn't intimate. It was a massive, extravagant celebration that probably cost close to $80,000 based on the venue and details visible in the photos. And I, her only sister, wasn't included in those 250 people because, according to family whispers I'd hear later, I was difficult and would make things awkward and had opinions about things that might create tension. In other words, I was excluded not because of space constraints but because I'd become the family scapegoat, the person who could be erased from major events without anyone feeling particularly bad about it. What Vanessa and her new husband Ryan didn't anticipate was how their extravagant wedding and extended honeymoon would create financial consequences that would force them to confront exactly who they'd excluded. And what I didn't anticipate was that less than 2 weeks after that elaborate wedding celebration I wasn't invited to, they'd be standing at my door desperate and homeless, asking for help from the sister who apparently wasn't close enough to invite to the wedding but was apparently close enough to solve their housing crisis. Before I tell you what I said when they showed up at my door with suitcases and tears and expectations that I'd save them from the consequences of their own choices, you need to understand how we got to this point. How family dynamics can be so toxic that excluding someone from a wedding seems reasonable. And how financial irresponsibility combined with entitlement can create a perfect storm of consequences. My name is Maya Peterson, and I'm 31 years old. My sister Vanessa is 28, and we grew up in a family where I was consistently positioned as the difficult child while she was the easy, fun one. Not because of anything dramatic either of us did, but because those roles got assigned early and stuck. I was the older sister who was serious, studious, opinionated. I questioned things that didn't make sense. I pointed out when rules were unfair or when my parents showed favoritism. I had strong feelings about social justice and inequality, and I wasn't quiet about them. I was, in short, the child who made family gatherings slightly uncomfortable by not just going along with everyone else's comfortable assumptions. Vanessa was the younger sister who was bubbly, social, agreeable. She didn't challenge anything, didn't question anyone, kept things light and fun. She was easy to be around because she never made anyone examine their beliefs or behaviors. She was, in short, the child who made family gatherings comfortable by maintaining the status quo. Our parents clearly preferred Vanessa's approach to life over mine. They celebrated her social success while viewing my academic success as nice but not really important. They praised her for not rocking the boat, while criticizing me for always creating drama whenever I pointed out problems or inequalities. They centered family events around her preferences while treating my preferences as inconvenient complications. By the time we were adults, the pattern was firmly established. Vanessa was the golden child whose choices were always supported, and I was the difficult child whose choices were always questioned. Vanessa's engagement to Ryan after dating him for just 8 months. Celebrated and supported financially by our parents. My decision to end a 3-year relationship because my partner was financially irresponsible and emotionally manipulative. Criticized as me being too picky and sabotaging my own happiness. The favoritism was constant and undeniable. But I'd learned to manage my expectations and build my own life separate from family approval. I had a good career as a financial analyst, my own apartment that I could afford comfortably, solid friendships, and a life I was proud of. I didn't need my family's validation to know I was doing well. But I'd still hoped, naively, in retrospect, that major family events would include me regardless of our complicated dynamics. When Vanessa got engaged, I'd been genuinely happy for her. I'd offered to help with wedding planning. I'd assumed I'd at least be invited even if I wasn't in the wedding party. So when she called with that small wedding story, I was hurt but not entirely surprised. It fit the pattern of my family treating me as optional, as someone whose presence was a favor rather than a given. I'd accepted the exclusion with as much grace as I could manage, deciding to use the wedding weekend for a solo trip somewhere peaceful rather than sitting at home dwelling on being excluded. What I discovered through social media on the actual wedding day shattered any remaining illusions I'd had about the situation. I wasn't checking obsessively. I'd actually decided to stay off social media that whole weekend, but a mutual friend who didn't know I wasn't invited texted me during the reception, "Your sister's wedding is gorgeous. Wish you were here." Confused, I opened Instagram. My feed was flooded with posts from the wedding. Photos of the massive venue. Videos of the 250 guests dancing. Stories showing the elaborate decorations and expensive details. Tag after tag of people I knew, distant relatives, family friends, Vanessa's co-workers, Ryan's college buddies, people who barely knew my sister, all at this small, intimate wedding I'd been excluded from. The betrayal was stunning. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited, it was that she'd lied about the reason. She'd made up a story about it being too small when actually it was massive and I simply wasn't wanted there. I spent that weekend processing grief and anger and resignation. Grief over the final confirmation that I wasn't valued by my family. Anger at the casual cruelty of lying rather than just being honest. Resignation that this was who they were and who they'd probably always be. I decided that weekend that I was done trying to maintain relationships with people who'd made clear I was optional to them. I didn't send a gift. I didn't send a congratulations message. I simply stopped reaching out to Vanessa, to my parents, to the extended family who'd all attended her wedding while knowing I'd been excluded. If they wanted relationships with me going forward, they'd have to do the work because I was done chasing people who clearly didn't want me around. What I didn't know during that weekend was what else was happening in Vanessa and Ryan's life. What I didn't know was that their elaborate $80,000 wedding had been funded partially by credit cards and loans they couldn't actually afford. What I didn't know was that they'd been spending beyond their means for months trying to create the perfect wedding and perfect life together. What I didn't know was that they'd been late on rent for their apartment for 2 months before the wedding, and that their landlord had issued warnings they'd ignored while focusing on wedding plans. And what I especially didn't know was that while they were on their 10-day honeymoon in Bali, another expensive choice they couldn't afford, charged to credit cards that were already maxed out, their landlord had started eviction proceedings for non-payment of rent. 10 days after the wedding, while I was back to my normal life and trying to move forward without my family, Vanessa and Ryan returned from their honeymoon to find their apartment locks changed and their belongings packed in boxes on the curb. They'd been formally evicted during their absence, and they were now homeless with nowhere to go. I learned all of this when they showed up at my apartment door on a Tuesday evening, 14 days after the wedding I hadn't been invited to. I was making dinner when I heard the knock, and I opened the door to find Vanessa and Ryan standing there with suitcases, tears streaming down Vanessa's face, looking desperate and exhausted. "Maya," Vanessa said, her voice breaking. "We need help. We've been evicted and we have nowhere to go. Can we stay with you? Just temporarily until we figure things out." I stood in my doorway, looking at my sister who'd excluded me from her wedding less than 2 weeks ago, who'd lied about why I wasn't invited, who'd included 250 other people but not me. My sister who'd never checked in on me after excluding me, never apologized, never acknowledged the hurt she'd caused. My sister who was now standing at my door expecting help because apparently I was close enough family to solve her crisis even though I wasn't close enough family to attend her wedding. I felt a lot of emotions in that moment: anger, hurt, vindication, pity, exhaustion. But mostly I felt clarity about exactly what this situation represented. I was being treated as a convenience, a resource to be accessed when needed but not valued enough to include when it wasn't necessary. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly, my voice calm and even. "You're asking me to let you move into my apartment? The apartment you've never visited, because you've never been interested enough in my life to come see where I live? You're asking me for help less than 2 weeks after you excluded me from your wedding and lied about the reason." "Maya, please," Vanessa begged. "I know things have been complicated between us, but you're my sister. We're family. And we're desperate. We have nowhere else to go." "Where are Mom and Dad?" I asked. "Why aren't you staying with them?" Ryan and Vanessa exchanged a look. "They said their house is too small and they can't accommodate us," Ryan said. "They suggested we ask you since you have a 2-bedroom apartment." Of course. Of course our parents, who'd financially supported Vanessa's expensive wedding, who owned a 4-bedroom house, who clearly favored her over me, of course they'd sent her to me rather than helping her themselves. Because I was the family member who could be inconvenienced without guilt. I looked at my sister, this person I'd once been close to, who I'd loved and supported and defended, who'd grown into someone who could exclude me from major life events without apparent guilt and then show up asking for help when she needed something. What I said next would determine whether I maintained the boundary I'd been building or whether I let them back in, because family helps family, even when family had proven they didn't value me. "Stay with me," because what happened in the next 30 seconds at my doorway set the tone for everything that would follow, and proved that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be someone's convenient solution when you weren't their valued relationship. I stood in my doorway looking at Vanessa and Ryan, processing their request and the audacity of showing up at my home expecting help after excluding me from their wedding. The silence stretched for several seconds while they waited for my response, clearly expecting me to immediately welcome them in because that's what family does. "No," I said finally, my voice firm and clear. "You can't stay here." Vanessa's face crumpled. "Maya, please. We have nowhere to go. We've been traveling for hours trying to figure out what to do. All our stuff is in storage. We had to pay for emergency storage for our belongings from the apartment. We're exhausted and desperate and you're my sister. I'm your sister when you need something," I interrupted, my voice still calm but with an edge now. "I wasn't your sister 2 weeks ago when you had 250 people at your wedding but couldn't find room for me." "That's not fair," Ryan said, his tone defensive. "The wedding was complicated with family dynamics." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting him off. "Don't stand at my door asking for help and then try to justify excluding me from your wedding. If you want to have a conversation about family dynamics, we can have that conversation. But it won't end with you moving into my apartment." "Maya, I'm sorry about the wedding," Vanessa said quickly, tears streaming faster now. "I should have handled it differently. I should have been honest with you. I should have found a way to include you. I was wrong, okay? I'm admitting I was wrong. But please, please don't punish us for that by leaving us homeless." "I'm not punishing you by leaving you homeless," I corrected. "You're experiencing the consequences of your own financial decisions. You chose to spend money on an elaborate wedding you couldn't afford. You chose to go on an expensive honeymoon while behind on rent. You chose to ignore eviction warnings while you were traveling. Those were your choices, not mine. And now you're experiencing the natural consequences of those choices." "We made mistakes," Ryan admitted, looking uncomfortable. We got caught up in wanting the perfect wedding and honeymoon. We know we overspent. But we're young and we're learning and we need family support while we get back on our feet. You need support from the family member you excluded from your wedding because the family members who actually attended and supported your wedding have decided they can't help you. I asked pointedly. Do you see how that might feel to me? You have 250 people who celebrated with you 2 weeks ago. Have you asked any of them for help? They were silent, which told me everything. They'd come to me first, or possibly after our parents refused, not because they valued me or our relationship, but because they viewed me as the most likely to cave to family obligation. I can't let you stay here, I said, maintaining my boundary despite the guilt I felt watching my sister cry. And it's not just about the wedding, though that's certainly part of it. It's about a pattern of behavior where I'm treated as optional until I'm needed. I'm not included in celebrations, I'm not valued as family, I'm criticized and excluded, until there's a crisis, and then suddenly I'm family again and I'm expected to drop everything to help. That's not a relationship. That's me being used. I haven't been a good sister, Vanessa sobbed. I know that. I've taken you for granted and I've let mom and dad's favoritism toward me affect how I treated you. I've been selfish and thoughtless. But Maya, please, I'm begging you. Just let us stay for a week while we figure something out. We'll sleep on the couch, we won't be in your way, we just need a place to stay while we sort out our finances and find a new apartment. I felt the pull of family obligation, the lifetime of programming that said you help family even when they've hurt you. But I also felt the clarity I'd gained over that wedding weekend when I'd finally accepted that my family didn't value me the way I deserved. And I knew that if I let them stay, just for a week, it would turn into weeks or months, and I'd end up being taken advantage of again while they continued not appreciating or valuing me. I'm sorry you're in this situation, I said, and I meant it genuinely despite everything. I'm sorry you're homeless and stressed. But I'm not the solution to your problem. You need to figure this out yourselves or with the family members who actually treated you like family. I suggest you try Ryan's parents, or your friends who were at the wedding, or you look into extended stay hotels or short-term rentals while you get your finances sorted out. We can't afford hotels or rentals, Ryan said, his voice rising with frustration. That's why we're asking to stay with family. You could afford an $80,000 wedding and a 10-day honeymoon in Bali, but you can't afford a week in an extended stay hotel. I asked, my skepticism clear. Those were choices about priorities, Ryan. You prioritized having an elaborate wedding and honeymoon over financial stability. That's fine, people make choices based on their values. But you don't get to make those choices and then expect other people to bail you out from the consequences. You're being cruel, Vanessa said, her tears turning to anger now that she was realizing I wasn't going to give in. You're punishing me for one mistake by letting your sister be homeless. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who's been treated as optional and inconvenient for years and who's finally setting boundaries, I replied. Vanessa, if you want to rebuild a relationship with me at some point, I'm potentially open to that. But it would require you actually doing the work of examining how you've treated me, taking real responsibility, and demonstrating through consistent behavior over time that you value me. Showing up at my door demanding help 2 weeks after excluding me from your wedding is not that work. That's just you being desperate and convenient family being the first place you turned. So that's it. You're just going to let us be homeless. You're not being homeless, you're experiencing temporary housing insecurity because of choices you made. You're adults with jobs and income, presumably, so you have options even if they're not as comfortable as you'd like. But those are your problems to solve, not mine. I started to close the door. Vanessa put her hand out to stop it. Maya, please. I'm sorry. I'm truly, genuinely sorry for everything. For the wedding, for how I've treated you over the years, for taking you for granted. You're right about all of it. But please don't turn me away when I'm desperate. I looked at my sister's face, tear-stained, desperate, afraid. Part of me wanted to relent, to let her in, to be the bigger person who helped despite being hurt. But I'd learned from years of being undervalued that being the bigger person often just meant being the person who got taken advantage of repeatedly. I'm not turning you away because you're desperate, I said quietly. I'm turning you away because helping you right now would mean sacrificing my own boundaries and well-being to solve a problem you created, and I'm not willing to do that anymore. I hope you figure out your situation. But I can't be your solution. I closed the door firmly. Through it, I heard Vanessa crying and Ryan's voice saying something I couldn't make out. I heard them walking away, their suitcases rolling on the hallway floor. I stood on the other side of my closed door, heart racing, hands shaking, feeling the weight of what I'd just done. I'd turned away my sister when she was homeless and asking for help. By any conventional standard of family obligation, I'd failed in that moment. And I felt guilty, deeply, painfully guilty. But I also felt something else, relief. Relief that I'd held my boundary. Relief that I'd chosen my own well-being over convenience to someone who'd proven they didn't value me. Relief that I'd finally done what I should have done years ago, protected myself from people who only treated me like family when they needed something. I called my therapist and left a voicemail asking for an emergency session the next day. I needed to process what had happened and make sure I was making choices from a healthy place rather than from trauma or vindictiveness. Dr. Sarah Kim called me back within an hour. I got your message. Tell me what happened. I explained the situation, the wedding exclusion, the lies, Vanessa and Ryan showing up homeless, my refusal to let them stay. Did I do the right thing? I asked. Or am I just being vindictive? Tell me this, Dr. Kim said. If you'd let them stay, what would that look like practically? They'd probably stay longer than just a week, because they clearly don't have their finances sorted out, I said, thinking through the logistics. They'd probably expect me to help them beyond just housing, maybe financial help, certainly emotional support. They'd probably continue not appreciating what I was doing because they feel entitled to family help. And when they eventually moved out and got stable again, they'd probably go back to treating me the way they have been, as optional and inconvenient, until they needed something again. So helping them wouldn't actually change the relationship dynamic or lead to them valuing you differently? No, probably not. If anything, it would reinforce that they could treat me badly and I'll still be available when they need something. Then it sounds like maintaining your boundary was the healthy choice, even though it feels uncomfortable, Dr. Kim observed. Maya, you're allowed to protect yourself from being used. You're allowed to say no to helping people who've hurt you, even if they're family, even if they're desperate. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel, it makes you someone who values herself enough not to accept mistreatment. Her words helped, but I still struggled with guilt over the following days. I kept thinking about Vanessa crying at my door, about her being homeless, about whether I should have at least let them stay for a few nights. I kept second-guessing my decision and wondering if I'd been too harsh. Then, 3 days after turning them away, I got a phone call from my mother. Maya, how could you? My mother's voice was sharp with anger and disappointment. Your sister came to you desperate and homeless and you turned her away. What kind of person does that to family? The kind of person who wasn't invited to her sister's wedding despite there being 250 other guests, I replied evenly. Mom, why are you calling me? Vanessa and Ryan came to me after you told them you couldn't help. Why is your 4-bedroom house too small for them but my 2-bedroom apartment should accommodate them? That's different. How is it different? You have more space than I do. You have more resources than I do. You were actually at Vanessa's wedding and supported her choices. I was excluded from that wedding. So explain to me why I'm the terrible person for not helping when you're also not helping. Because you're being spiteful about the wedding, I'm being boundaried about a pattern of mistreatment that the wedding exemplified, I corrected. Mom, do you understand that Vanessa lied to me? She told me the wedding was too small to invite me, and then I saw photos of 250 people there. She deliberately excluded me and lied about why. And now, less than 2 weeks later, she's at my door expecting me to house her because suddenly I'm family when she needs something. Do you not see the problem with that? She made a mistake with the wedding, my mother said, though her tone suggested she didn't actually think it was a mistake. But mistakes don't mean you abandon family when they're in crisis. You're abandoning her by not letting her stay with you, I pointed out. But somehow that's okay because you're not being spiteful, you just genuinely can't help. Why is your inability to help acceptable but mine isn't? Silence on the phone. She didn't have a good answer because the real answer was that they'd always held me to different standards than they held Vanessa. When Vanessa needed something and couldn't get it, that was unfortunate. When I needed something and didn't get it, that was because I was difficult or too demanding. The double standard was obvious once you named it directly. Your sister is staying with us temporarily, my mother finally said. We figured out a way to make it work even though it's cramped and uncomfortable. Because that's what family does, they make sacrifices for each other. Then I'm glad she has somewhere to stay, I said genuinely. I hope they get their situation sorted out quickly. You should apologize to her for turning her away. No, I said firmly. I'm not apologizing for setting boundaries with someone who's treated me poorly. If Vanessa wants to apologize to me for excluding me from her wedding and for the years of taking me for granted, I'll listen. But I'm not apologizing for refusing to be convenient family that only matters when there's a crisis. My mother ended the call shortly after, clearly frustrated that she couldn't guilt me into either helping Vanessa or apologizing for not helping. I felt the familiar ache of disappointing my family, but I also felt stronger in my boundaries than I'd felt in years. Over the next few weeks, I heard through extended family members that Vanessa and Ryan were indeed staying with my parents, which apparently my parents could accommodate despite their earlier claims, that they were working on sorting out their finances, and that Vanessa was very hurt by my refusal to help them. I didn't reach out. I maintained the boundary I'd set and focused on my own life. And slowly, I started to feel less guilty and more clear that I'd made the right choice for my own well-being. What I didn't know during those weeks was that Vanessa and Ryan's situation was about to get more complicated, and that their next crisis would once again bring them to my door asking for help. But this time, what they asked for would be even more audacious than housing, and my response would make it clear once and for all where I stood on being used as convenient family. 6 weeks after turning Vanessa and Ryan away from my door, I'd settled into a peaceful rhythm of life without my family's drama. I'd stopped checking social media for updates about them, stopped asking mutual friends about their situation, stopped carrying the mental weight of whether I'd made the right choice. I'd made my choice, I'd maintained my boundary, and I was moving forward. Then I received an email from Vanessa. Not a text, not a call, but a carefully crafted email that appeared to have been thought through and possibly even reviewed by someone else before sending. The subject line was, "I owe you an apology." I stared at it for a long moment before opening it, debating whether engaging at all was worth the emotional energy. But curiosity won out. I opened the email. "Dear Maya, I've spent the past 6 weeks thinking about everything that's happened, the wedding, showing up at your door, how I've treated you over the years. I've been in therapy working through my behavior and the family dynamics we grew up in. And I owe you an apology that I should have given you years ago. You were right about everything you said. I did exclude you from the wedding deliberately, and I lied about the reason. The truth is that Ryan's parents had opinions about having you there because they knew you and I had a complicated relationship, and rather than standing up for you or examining whether their opinions were fair, I just went along with excluding you because it was easier. I prioritized avoiding conflict with my in-laws over including my own sister. That was wrong. I've taken you for granted for years. I've let Mom and Dad's favoritism toward me affect how I treated you. I've benefited from being the easy child without examining what that cost you as the difficult child. I've expected you to always be available for me without ever being equally available for you. And when you finally set a boundary and said no to helping us, I responded with anger instead of understanding that I'd earned that boundary through my own behavior. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know I hurt you deeply and that trust doesn't come back just because someone apologizes. I'm writing because you deserve to hear me acknowledge specifically what I did wrong and take responsibility for it without excuses. I hope someday you might be willing to try rebuilding our relationship, but I understand if you're not. Either way, I want you to know, I see how I failed you as a sister. I'm working on being better. And I'm genuinely sorry. Vanessa. I read the email 3 times, analyzing every sentence for manipulation or hidden agenda. It seemed more accountable than anything Vanessa had ever said to me before. It named specific behaviors rather than making vague apologies. It didn't ask for anything in return. It acknowledged my right to maintain boundaries. But I'd been hurt too many times by my family's temporary accountability that disappeared as soon as they got what they wanted. I wasn't ready to trust that this was genuine change rather than a strategic attempt to get me to lower my boundaries. I saved the email without responding. I wanted time to sit with it, to process my feelings, to figure out what kind of response, if any, served my well-being. 2 days later, before I decided whether to respond to the email, I received a phone call from Ryan. I almost didn't answer. I had no interest in talking to my brother-in-law who'd stood at my door 6 weeks ago acting entitled to my help. But something made me pick up. Maya, Ryan's voice was careful, tentative. I'm calling to ask you something, and I want to be clear up front that I'll respect whatever answer you give. Okay, I said warily. Vanessa and I are still staying with your parents. It's been difficult. Their house really isn't set up for 3 adults to live together, and there's tension because we have different schedules and habits. We've been saving money to try to get our own place again, but we're still several $1,000s short of what we need for first month, last month, security deposit, and moving costs. I could feel where this was going and I didn't like it. We have most of what we need, Ryan continued. We're about $3,500 short. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to lend us that money. Not give, lend. We'd pay you back in installments over the next year with interest if you want. I have a payment plan written out that I can send you. But we need help bridging this gap so we can move out of your parents' house and get our lives back on track. The audacity was breathtaking. 6 weeks ago they'd shown up at my door expecting free housing. Now they wanted $3,500. From the sister who wasn't important enough to invite to the wedding. No, I said simply. Maya, I know we've hurt you and I understand why you'd be hesitant, Ryan said quickly, clearly prepared for this response. But this is different from us asking to stay with you. This is a loan with clear repayment terms. We're not asking for charity, we're asking for help from family with the full intention of paying you back. Ryan, let me be very clear, I'm not lending you money. Not $3,500, not any amount. And it's not because I don't have the money or because I'm trying to punish you. It's because lending money to family members who've demonstrated poor financial judgment and who I don't trust to prioritize repaying me is a bad decision that would likely damage our already strained relationship further. We would pay you back. You're $3,500 short of what you need for an apartment despite having 6 weeks to save while living rent-free at my parents' house, I interrupted. That tells me that either you're not making enough money to afford an apartment even with help, or you're still spending money on things you can't afford instead of prioritizing getting stable housing. Either way, lending you money is a bad idea. That's not fair. You don't know our situation. I know that 6 weeks ago you were evicted for not paying rent while spending money on an elaborate wedding and honeymoon. I know that you came to my door expecting free housing after excluding me from that wedding. I know that you're now asking me for money while apparently not having asked your 250 wedding guests for help. Those are the facts I know, and they're enough for me to make my decision. There was silence on the phone. Then Ryan tried a different approach. Vanessa sent you an email apologizing. She's been working really hard on understanding how she hurt you. She's trying to make things right. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for me reading her email and taking it seriously, I said. But Ryan, one email doesn't undo years of mistreatment. And more importantly, real amends aren't about sending an apology and then immediately asking for something. If Vanessa's apology is genuine, she should be able to respect my boundaries and give me space without expecting anything in return. The fact that you're calling me 2 days after her apology asking for money suggests that the apology was strategic rather than genuine. That's not, Ryan started to argue. I'm not lending you money, I said firmly. Figure out another solution. Get a personal loan from a bank. Ask your parents for help. Ask Ryan's parents. Ask your friends. But I'm not your solution to this problem or any other problem. And the fact that you keep coming to me when you need something while not valuing me the rest of the time is exactly why I'm maintaining these boundaries. I ended the call before Ryan could continue arguing. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger at the continued entitlement, the continued assumption that I should help despite how I'd been treated, the continued positioning of me as convenient family to be used when needed. I forwarded Ryan's phone number to my phone's block. List. Then I typed a response to Vanessa's email. Vanessa, I received your email and I appreciate the specific accountability in it. However, I'm writing now because Ryan just called asking me to lend you $3,500. The timing of that call, 2 days after your apology email, makes me question whether the apology was genuine or strategic. If your apology was genuine, you should be able to respect my boundaries and give me space without expecting anything in return. Real amends aren't about apologizing and then immediately asking for something. They're about taking responsibility, demonstrating changed behavior over time, and respecting the other person's need for distance while they heal. I'm not lending you money. I'm not providing housing. I'm not bailing you out of financial consequences that resulted from your own choices. And if you continue to use me as a resource while not actually valuing me as family, we won't have any relationship at all. If you're truly interested in rebuilding our relationship someday, here's what that would require. Years of demonstrated behavior change, respect for my boundaries without guilt-tripping, genuine interest in my life beyond what I can do for you, and no more treating me as convenient family who only matters in crisis. I'm not holding my breath for that, but I'm letting you know the requirements in case you're actually interested. Maya, I sent the email and then blocked Vanessa's email address. I was done being accessible to people who'd proven they only contacted me when they wanted something. The next day, my mother called. I'd been expecting this. Of course my mother would hear about Ryan's call and my refusal and would try to guilt me into helping. You're really not going to help your sister? My mother asked, her voice heavy with disappointment. No, I'm not, I said calmly. Maya, $3,500 is nothing to you. You have a good job, you have savings, you could easily afford to help them and not even notice the money. Whether I can afford it is irrelevant, I interrupted. I'm not helping because they've demonstrated they don't value me unless they need something. Mom, do you not see the pattern? They excluded me from the wedding. Then they showed up at my door expecting housing. Now they want money. Every single interaction they initiate with me is about them wanting something. That's not a relationship, that's me being used. She apologized, she sent an email, and then 2 days later her husband called asking for money. That's not genuine apology, that's strategy. Real change would be respecting my boundaries and giving me space without expecting anything. But they can't do that because they need money, so they're trying to manipulate me into helping by sending an apology first. You're being incredibly selfish, my mother said sharply. Your sister is struggling and you could help her easily, but you're choosing not to out of spite. I'm choosing not to out of self-protection, I corrected. And Mom, you and Dad could help them. You have more resources than I do. You actually attended Vanessa's wedding and celebrated with her. You're currently housing them. You're in a much better position to help them financially than I am. So why aren't you lending them the money? Silence. Then, we've already helped them significantly by letting them stay with us, and I've already helped them significantly by not publicizing how badly they've treated me or making their eviction and financial irresponsibility common knowledge among extended family, I said. See how that works? Everyone can justify why they're not helping more. But for some reason, my justification, which is based on them actively excluding and mistreating me, is selfish, while your justification is reasonable. The double standard is obvious. You're going to regret this when she needs you someday and you've burned all your bridges, my mother warned. I'm protecting myself from people who've proven they only value me when they need something, I replied. If that means burning bridges, so be it. Those bridges were only ever one way anyway, traffic only flowed from me to Vanessa, never the reverse. I'm okay with those bridges being gone. My mother ended the call frustrated. And I felt clear. Clearer than I'd felt in years about who my family was and what kind of relationships I was willing to accept. Over the following weeks, I heard through family channels that Vanessa and Ryan eventually got money from Ryan's parents to secure their new apartment. They moved out of my parents' house. Their lives stabilized. And according to my grandmother, who I still occasionally talk to because she'd never participated in the favoritism and had always treated me fairly, Vanessa was hurt by my refusal to help but was starting to understand why I'd maintained boundaries. I didn't reach out. I maintained the distance I'd created and focused on building relationships with people who actually valued me. And slowly, the guilt I'd initially felt about turning Vanessa away was replaced by peace about having finally protected myself from people who'd proven they couldn't treat me well. What happened over the next year would test whether Vanessa's claimed understanding was genuine or whether she'd learned nothing from the experience. And my response would determine once and for all whether there was any possibility of rebuilding our relationship or whether we were done permanently. 1 year after Vanessa's wedding, 1 year after being excluded from the celebration that had 250 guests but no room for me, I received a card in the mail. Not an email this time, but an actual handwritten card with a local postmark. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a simple note: Maya, it's been a year since my wedding and almost a year since you set boundaries with me. I've spent that year in therapy working on understanding the patterns that led to me treating you so badly. I'm writing because I want you to know I've learned a lot, and I hope someday you might be willing to have coffee and talk. No agenda, no asks for help. Just two sisters trying to figure out if there's any relationship worth rebuilding. If you're interested, let me know. If not, I understand. Vanessa. I stared at the card for a long time. Part of me was curious about whether Vanessa had actually changed. Part of me was skeptical that 1 year of therapy could undo decades of toxic patterns. Part of me was tired of the whole dynamic and wanted to just continue living my life without this complication. I showed the card to Dr. Kim in our next therapy session. "What do you think?" she asked. "Does this feel genuine to you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It's a simple ask, just coffee, no agenda. But I'm worried that accepting would open a door I'm not ready to open, or that it would lead to her gradually expecting more from me until we're back in the old dynamic. Those are valid concerns. What would you need from Vanessa to feel safe having coffee with her?" I thought carefully. I'd need to know that she understands the specific ways she hurt me, not just vague, "I was a bad sister" statements. I'd need to see evidence of actual behavior change, not just words about change. I'd need her to respect my boundaries if I set them during our conversation. And I'd need to feel like she values me as a person, not just feels guilty about how she treated me. Those are all reasonable needs. Do you want to test whether Vanessa can meet them? I sat with the question for several days. Finally, I decided that I at least owed it to myself to see whether anything had genuinely changed. Not because I owed Vanessa a chance, but because I wanted to know whether there was any possibility of salvaging our relationship or whether I should close that door permanently. I texted Vanessa, "I'm willing to meet for coffee. Saturday at 10 a.m. at Riverside Cafe. Ground rules: we talk about the past honestly, including the wedding and everything that followed. No asking me for anything, not help, not money, not compromises on my boundaries. Just honest conversation. If you can agree to those terms, I'll be there." She responded within minutes, "I agree to all of that. Thank you for giving me this chance." Saturday arrived. I got to Riverside Cafe 10 minutes early, ordered a coffee, and sat at a corner table where I could see the door. I was nervous but also clear about my boundaries. If this conversation went badly, I'd leave. I didn't owe Vanessa prolonged discomfort just because she wanted to talk. Vanessa arrived exactly on time, looking more subdued than I'd seen her in years. She ordered a coffee and sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around her cup like she needed something to hold on to. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly. "I know you didn't have to." "I'm here because I want to see if anything has actually changed," I said directly. "Not because I owe you a chance or because family has to forgive family. I'm here because I'm curious about whether a year of therapy has led to real growth or just better apology tactics." She nodded, not looking offended by my bluntness. "That's fair. Maya, I've learned a lot this year about myself and our family dynamics. Things I should have understood years ago but was too comfortable being the favorite to examine." "Like what?" "Like the fact that I benefited from you being positioned as the difficult child because it meant I got to be the easy child without actually having to be particularly good or accomplished. Like the fact that mom and dad's favoritism toward me hurt you every single day growing up and I not only didn't stand up for you but actively participated in treating you as less important. Like the fact that I built my whole sense of worth on being the daughter they preferred, which meant I needed you to stay in the difficult role to maintain my position." I was surprised by the specificity of her understanding. And the wedding. The wedding was the culmination of years of treating you as optional, Vanessa said, meeting my eyes directly. Ryan's parents said they were uncomfortable with you being there because they'd heard from Mom and Dad that you were difficult and might cause problems. Instead of questioning that narrative or defending you, I just went along with excluding you because it was easier than standing up to them or examining whether their concerns were fair. I chose the path of least resistance, which meant excluding my own sister from a major life event. You lied to me about why, I pointed out. You said it was a small wedding when you knew it wasn't. I lied because I was ashamed of the real reason and I didn't want to confront it, Vanessa admitted. Telling you it was small felt easier than saying I'm excluding you because my in-laws don't like you and I'm prioritizing their comfort over your inclusion. But lying just made it worse because when you saw the photos, you knew I deliberately excluded you and lied about it. That's a double betrayal. Yes, it is. And then showing up at your door expecting you to house us after all that, Vanessa shook her head. That was the peak of my entitlement. I just excluded you from the most important event of my life to that point, and less than 2 weeks later I showed up expecting you to bail me out of the consequences of my own financial irresponsibility. And when you said no, I was angry at you instead of understanding that you were finally protecting yourself from me using you. Ryan called asking for money a few days after you sent that apology email, I said. That made me think the apology was strategic rather than genuine. It was strategic, Vanessa said, surprising me with her honesty. I'd realized you were serious about boundaries and I thought if I apologized, you might be willing to help us financially. I didn't understand yet that real apology means accepting whatever response the hurt person has without expecting anything in return. I was still trying to manipulate you, just with better tactics. Her honesty was disarming. I'd expected defensiveness or minimization. Instead, she was naming her own manipulation directly. What changed? I asked. Why are you suddenly seeing all of this clearly when you couldn't see it a year ago? Because a year ago, my life was organized around avoiding discomfort, Vanessa said. I avoided examining our family dynamics because it was uncomfortable. I avoided standing up for you because it would have created conflict. I avoided taking responsibility for my financial choices because it was easier to ask you to bail us out. But after you said no, to housing, to money, to all of it, I had to sit with the consequences of my choices. And my therapist helped me understand that I'd spent my whole life avoiding discomfort by making other people accommodate me, and that the only way to actually grow was to stop running from uncomfortable truths. So what are the uncomfortable truths you've accepted? That I've been a terrible sister to you for most of our lives, Vanessa said, her eyes getting wet. That I've benefited from systemic favoritism while never questioning whether it was fair. That I've treated you as convenient rather than valued. That I've damaged our relationship possibly beyond repair through years of taking you for granted. And that you don't owe me forgiveness or relationship repair even though I'm finally understanding what I did wrong. I sat with her words, assessing whether they felt genuine or performed. They felt genuine, painfully, uncomfortably genuine in ways that suggested she'd actually done the internal work rather than just learning what to say. What do you want from me now? I asked. And be honest, not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually want. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking carefully. I want a chance to build a different kind of relationship with you, she said finally. Not picking up where we left off, because where we left off was toxic and unhealthy. But maybe starting over as adults who understand our history and are trying to do better. I want to know you as a person rather than as my sister who's difficult. I want to understand your life and your work and what matters to you. I want to be someone you can trust eventually, even though I know I haven't earned that yet. What about Mom and Dad? I asked. Have you talked to them about any of this? I've tried, Vanessa said. They're defensive. They don't want to examine the favoritism because admitting it means acknowledging they failed you. I've stopped participating in conversations where they criticize you or treat you as optional. I've started pointing out when they're showing favoritism. But Maya, I can't fix their relationship with you. They have to choose to do that work themselves. I can only change my own behavior. What does changed behavior look like for you? Respecting your boundaries without argument. Being genuinely interested in your life rather than just talking about mine. Not asking you for anything until I've demonstrated through consistent actions over years that I value you. Acknowledging when I mess up instead of getting defensive. Being someone you can count on, not just someone who shows up when I need something. These were all the right answers, but I'd learned that saying the right things was easy. Doing them consistently over time was hard. Here's what I'm willing to offer, I said carefully. I'm willing to have occasional coffee meetings like this, maybe once every few months, where we talk honestly about our history and see if you're actually following through on these commitments. I'm not willing to jump back into a close sisterly relationship. I'm not willing to attend family events with you where mom and dad are present. I'm not willing to help you if you have another crisis. But I'm willing to see if there's a foundation we can slowly build something on. I'll take that, Vanessa said immediately. Maya, I know I don't deserve even that much. Thank you for being willing to try. We talked for another hour, about her therapy insights, about my life and work, about family dynamics we'd both experienced differently growing up. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, the first time we'd really talked as adults rather than as the roles we'd been assigned as children. When we left the cafe, Vanessa hugged me briefly. Thank you, she said again. I know words are cheap and I need to prove myself through actions. I'm ready to do that. We'll see, I said, not willing to fully trust yet but willing to leave the possibility open. Over the following year, Vanessa did something I hadn't expected, she followed through. She texted occasionally asking how I was doing without asking for anything. She sent articles she thought I'd find interesting based on conversations we'd had. She invited me to coffee every few months and respected when I said no based on my schedule or emotional bandwidth. She never asked for money or help. She never guilt-tripped me about family events I didn't attend. She just showed up consistently as someone interested in having a relationship without expecting me to do all the emotional work. Slowly, carefully, I started to trust that maybe she had actually changed. Not completely, people don't undo decades of patterns in a year or two. But enough that I could see effort and genuine growth rather than just performance. 2 years after that first coffee meeting, Vanessa asked if I'd be willing to meet Ryan and see their new apartment. I agreed, cautiously. The apartment was modest, they'd clearly learned their lesson about living within their means. Ryan apologized to me directly for his role in the wedding exclusion and for calling asking for money. He acknowledged he'd been entitled and had treated me poorly. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old patterns would surface and I'd have to reinforce boundaries. But gradually, I started to believe that Vanessa had actually done the work of examining her behavior and changing it. 3 years after the wedding where I wasn't invited, Vanessa called to tell me she was pregnant. I'm calling because I want you to know, not because I need anything, she said carefully. And Maya, I want you to be part of this kid's life if you're willing. Not as the aunt who gets called when we need babysitting, but as someone I want them to know and love. You don't have to decide now. I'm just letting you know that you're welcome in their life if you want to be. I cried after that call. Not from sadness but from grief for what could have been if Vanessa had been capable of this kind of relationship years earlier. But also from hope that maybe we were building something now that, while it would never replace what we'd lost, was at least honest and healthier. Looking back now, 5 years after that wedding exclusion, I can see how that painful experience forced necessary change in our relationship. Being excluded hurt terribly. Turning Vanessa away when she was homeless felt cruel. Refusing to lend her money felt harsh. But all of those boundaries protected me from continuing to be used and ultimately forced Vanessa to examine her own behavior in ways she might never have done if I just continued accepting how she treated me. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is protect yourself from people who can't treat you well, even if those people are family. Sometimes boundaries that feel harsh in the moment are actually the foundation for healthier relationships later. And sometimes people need to experience the consequences of their actions before they can actually change. I'm not fully healed from the years of being treated as the difficult child who was optional and convenient. I'm not fully trusting of Vanessa even with years of changed behavior. But I'm at peace with the choices I made to protect myself. And I'm grateful that those choices, as painful as they were, ultimately created space for something healthier to grow. For anyone watching who's been excluded, used, or treated as convenient family who only matters in crisis, you don't owe people access to you just because you share DNA. You're allowed to protect yourself with boundaries even when those boundaries feel harsh. You're allowed to refuse to help people who've hurt you. And you're allowed to require years of demonstrated change before you trust someone again. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel, it makes you someone who values yourself enough not to accept mistreatment. And sometimes the people who hurt you need to experience the consequences of losing you before they're motivated to actually change. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment if you've ever had to set difficult boundaries with family. How did it go? What would you do differently? Subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and building relationships that honor your worth.